3 words from an 8-year-old orphan girl silenced the most powerful voices in Hollywood. But it wasn't what she said that broke 2 grown men on live television. It was the way her tiny voice trembled, the secrets she'd been carrying, and the impossible truth that would change everyone in that Atlanta studio forever. What happened next defied every rule of television and reminded America what real strength looks like. The moment those words left little Sofia's lips, Steve Harvey's microphone slipped from his hands, hitting the studio floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the silence. Denzel Washington, sitting in the celebrity guest chair, covered his face as tears began flowing uncontrollably. The entire Family Feud studio fell into a silence so profound you could hear hearts breaking across the room. Camera operators who had filmed thousands of shows found themselves struggling to keep their equipment steady through their own tears. But this moment didn't happen in isolation. To understand how we got to this unprecedented breakdown that would change television history, we need to go back to where it all began and to the remarkable journey that brought Sofia Martinez to this stage. It was supposed to be a celebration episode. Family Feud had invited Hollywood legend Denzel Washington as a special guest to play alongside the Martinez family from Los Angeles. The Martinez family had been chosen through a special program that paired foster families with celebrity guests, designed to bring joy and awareness to children in the system. What nobody knew was that 8-year-old Sofia Martinez carried a secret that would transform this game show into something far more powerful than entertainment. Sofia had been in the foster care system for 3 years, but her story began much earlier. Her biological parents, Maria and Carlos, had been young dreamers who worked multiple jobs to afford a small house in East Los Angeles. They filled their home with laughter, music, and the kind of unconditional love that makes childhood magical. Sofia's earliest memories were of her father teaching her to dance in their tiny living room, while her mother sang along to old Mexican ballads. The house fire that took their lives happened on a Tuesday night in December, just 3 days before Sofia's 5th birthday. She had been sleeping over at her grandmother's house, a decision that saved her life, but would haunt her with survivor's guilt for years to come. When her grandmother passed away just 6 months later, Sofia entered a system that, despite the best intentions of many, would teach her that love was temporary and that safety was never guaranteed. In 3 years, Sofia had lived in 7 different homes. Some were kind, but overwhelmed. Others were well-meaning, but unprepared for a child carrying such deep trauma. A few, sadly, saw her as nothing more than a monthly check. Each transition taught Sofia to pack her few belongings quickly, to never get too comfortable, and to guard her heart carefully. The night terrors started after the 3rd placement fell through. Sofia would wake up screaming, convinced she smelled smoke, convinced she was losing another home. Social workers noted her resilience during the day, but nights were when her carefully constructed walls would crumble. She learned to cry silently into her pillow, not wanting to be seen as too much trouble for families already stretched thin. Despite her young age, Sofia possessed an old soul's wisdom and a resilience that amazed everyone who met her. She rarely spoke about her past, rarely complained, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people's emotions. Perhaps it was survival instinct, or perhaps it was the gift that comes from experiencing loss too early. Whatever it was, Sofia saw things that adults missed. The Martinez family had been different from the start. Elena Martinez, a nurse who worked with pediatric patients, and her husband Roberto, a high school teacher, had specifically requested to foster older children, the ones who were often overlooked because people wanted babies. They had seen Sofia's file, noted her history of multiple placements, and something in her school photo had spoken to them. "She has old eyes," Elena had told Roberto when they first saw Sofia's picture. "She's seen too much, but she's still fighting." When Sofia first arrived at their home 4 months earlier, she had stood in the doorway clutching a trash bag containing all her worldly possessions, waiting for Elena to tell her the rules, waiting to learn what would be expected of her in this new temporary placement. Instead, Elena had knelt down to Sofia's level and said simply, "Would you like to see your room? It's yours for as long as you want it to be." That phrase, "as long as you want it to be," had stuck with Sofia. Most families told her how long she could stay. Elena was the first adult to suggest that the choice might be hers. The selection for Family Feud had come through a special outreach program that the show ran annually, partnering with local foster care organizations to highlight the need for permanent families. The Martinez family had submitted their application not for the potential prizes, but because Sofia had mentioned once that she liked watching game shows. They made her feel normal, like the families on television who laughed and hugged and seemed to belong together. For weeks leading up to the taping, Sofia had practiced potential answers with Roberto during their evening homework sessions. She was naturally shy, but something about Roberto's patient teaching style helped her come out of her shell. Elena would find them at the kitchen table, Sofia giggling as Roberto acted out ridiculous survey responses, both of them trying to think like 100 people surveyed. The morning of the taping, Sofia had woken up before dawn, staring at the yellow dress hanging in her closet. It was the first piece of clothing that had ever been bought specifically for her, not handed down from previous foster children or selected from a donation bin. Elena had taken her shopping for it, letting Sofia choose the color, the style, everything. For the first time in her life, Sofia felt like she looked the way she wanted to look. But as the family prepared to leave for the studio, Sofia felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came whenever anything good was about to happen. Experience had taught her that good things were usually followed by disappointment, that getting excited about something only made it hurt more when it was taken away. "And who is this beautiful young lady?" Denzel had asked, kneeling down to Sofia's level with that warm smile that had captivated audiences for decades. "I'm Sofia," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sofia? That's a beautiful name. Are you excited to be here today?" Sofia nodded, but something in her expression caught Denzel's attention. There was a depth there, a knowing that seemed far beyond her years. As someone who had portrayed complex characters his entire career, Denzel was skilled at reading people, and something about this little girl intrigued him. Steve Harvey had noticed the same thing during the family introductions. When he knelt down to talk to Sofia, she looked directly into his eyes with an intensity that was both endearing and slightly unnerving. There was something about quiet children that always drew Steve's attention, perhaps because he recognized the weight they carried, the secrets they held in their small frames. The game began with its usual energy and excitement. The Martinez family was doing well, and Denzel was proving to be an entertaining guest, joking with Steve and encouraging the family with his characteristic charm and warmth. Sofia sat at the end of the family podium, too small to reach the buzzer easily, but her eyes never left the action. During the second round, something shifted. The question was simple enough. Name something that makes a house feel like home. The answers came easily from the family members. Family photos, home-cooked meals, comfortable furniture, standard responses that lit up the board and kept the energy high. But when it was Sofia's turn, she hesitated. Steve noticed immediately and walked over to her with his trademark gentle approach to younger contestants. "What do you think, sweetheart? What makes a house feel like home?" Sofia looked up at him, then over at Denzel, who was watching with interest. Her small hands gripped the edge of the podium, and for a moment, the studio held its breath, waiting for her answer. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice so quiet the microphones barely picked it up. Steve smiled encouragingly. "That's okay, honey. Just think about your house with the Martinez family. What makes it special?" That's when Sofia's composure began to crack. Tears started forming in her eyes, and she shook her head slowly. "It's not my house," she said, her voice getting smaller. "None of them were ever my house." The studio audience, which had been energetic and supportive, began to sense that something deeper was happening. Steve glanced at the producers, unsure how to handle this unexpected emotional moment. But before he could redirect, Sofia continued speaking.
"I've lived in 8 different houses,"
she said, her voice growing stronger even as tears began flowing, "and none of them felt like home, because I knew I would have to leave." Denzel Washington, who had been watching from his guest chair, felt something shift inside his chest. As someone who had grown up with his own challenges and had spent years working with youth programs, he recognized the pain in Sofia's voice. Without thinking, he stood up and walked over to where she stood. Steve Harvey, veteran host who had navigated thousands of unexpected moments, found himself at a loss for words. This wasn't just a contestant having an emotional moment. This was a child revealing the deepest truth of her young life on national television. Sofia, Denzel said gently, placing a protective hand on her small shoulder. You're very brave to tell us that. But Sofia wasn't finished. Looking up at both men with the entire studio hanging on her every word, she said something that would change everyone present. I just want someone to choose me and mean it forever. The words hit the studio like a physical force. Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, stood completely speechless. His hands began to tremble slightly as the full weight of Sofia's words sank in. Denzel Washington, who had delivered some of the most powerful monologues in cinema history, found himself struggling to maintain his composure as memories of his own childhood uncertainties came flooding back. In the control room, producers were frantically whispering into their headsets, unsure how to handle this unprecedented moment. The show's executive producer, a veteran of 30 years in television, found herself wiping away tears as she watched the monitors. Keep the cameras rolling, she whispered to her team. This is real. This matters. In that moment, everyone in the studio understood that they were witnessing something far more important than a game show. This was a child's deepest truth, spoken with a courage that put every adult in that room to shame. Audience members were reaching for tissues. Mothers were thinking of their own children. Fathers were questioning how many Sofias there were in the world, waiting to be chosen. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. In television time, 30 seconds of silence is an eternity, but nobody moved to fill it. Sofia's words hung in the air like a prayer, waiting for someone to respond with the reverence they deserved. Steve Harvey made a decision that would define not just that episode, but his legacy as a host. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to stop this game right here, because what Sofia just shared with us is more important than any points on any board." The production staff was in chaos. Stopping a live taping was unprecedented. But Steve wasn't thinking about television anymore. He was thinking about the little girl who had just trusted them with her deepest pain. Denzel, meanwhile, was fighting his own emotional battle. The little girl's words had triggered something deep within him. Memories of his own childhood struggles, his own moments of feeling uncertain about where he belonged. As tears began forming in his eyes, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He knelt down in front of Sofia and looked directly into her eyes. "Sofia," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know something. The fact that you're still hoping, still believing that someone will choose you forever, that tells me everything I need to know about how special you are." The camera operators, who had been filming countless game shows, found themselves wiping their eyes as they continued to capture this unprecedented moment. In the control room, producers who usually focused on timing and ratings were reaching for tissues. But Steve Harvey wasn't finished. In a move that surprised everyone, he walked over to the Martinez family and spoke directly to them on live television. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that transcended entertainment. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me and with Sofia. Is she just another foster placement for you, or is she family?" The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer. Mrs. Martinez, tears streaming down her face, walked over to Sofia and knelt down beside Denzel. "Sofia," she said, her voice breaking, "we've been trying to find the right way to tell you. We've already started the adoption papers. We want you to be our daughter forever, if you'll have us." The explosion of emotion that followed was unlike anything ever captured on television. Sofia's face transformed from guarded hope to pure joy as she threw her arms around Mrs. Martinez. The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't the typical game show cheering. This was the sound of people witnessing love in its purest form. Denzel Washington, who had maintained his composure through decades of emotional roles, completely broke down. Tears flowed freely down his face as he watched this little girl finally receive the one thing she'd been praying for, a forever family. Steve Harvey, meanwhile, was openly crying as he addressed the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is what Family Feud is really about. It's not about the games or the prizes. It's about family. It's about love. It's about moments like this that remind us what really matters. But the surprises weren't over. Denzel Washington, still kneeling beside Sofia, pulled out his phone and made a call right there on the stage. After a brief conversation, he hung up and looked at the Martinez family. "My foundation is going to cover all of Sofia's adoption costs," he announced, his voice still emotional but strong. "And we're setting up a college fund for her, because any little girl brave enough to speak her truth like that deserves every opportunity in the world." The studio erupted again, but Sofia's reaction was the most powerful. She looked up at Denzel with those wise old soul eyes and said simply, "Thank you for listening to me." Those 6 words broke Denzel completely. Here was a child who had spent years not being heard, not being chosen, thanking him for simply listening. It was a humility and grace that put every adult in that room to shame. Steve Harvey, wiping his own tears, made another unprecedented decision. "You know what we're gonna do?" he announced to the studio. "We're gonna start this game over. But this time, we're playing for Sofia. Every point the Martinez family scores, every dollar they win, it's all going into Sofia's future." What happened next was pure magic. Both families on stage joined together as one team, playing not against each other, but for Sofia's future. Denzel abandoned his role as guest and became a teammate, calling out answers and celebrating every point like they were his own family. The question Steve asked seemed divinely inspired. "Name something that makes a family strong. Name something worth waiting for. Name something that lasts forever." And with each answer, Sofia's confidence grew. Her smile became brighter and her voice became stronger. By the end of that impossible episode, Sofia had answered several questions herself. When Steve asked, "Name something that makes you brave," Sofia answered without hesitation, "Knowing someone believes in you." The episode aired 3 months later and became the highest-rated Family Feud episode in the show's history. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about foster care and adoption that would continue for years. Denzel Washington's foundation received thousands of donations, but more than that, it received thousands of applications from families wanting to adopt older children, specifically requesting children who had been in multiple placements. The Martinez family received support from around the world. Letters poured in from as far as Japan and Australia, from people who had been moved by Sofia's courage and wanted to contribute to her future. A scholarship fund was established in her name that would eventually help dozens of foster children attend college. Sofia became a symbol of hope for children everywhere who were waiting to be chosen, but she also became something more, a reminder that the most powerful voices often come from the most unexpected places. The night the episode aired, viewing parties were held in foster homes across America. Social workers gathered with their families to watch, and many later reported that Sofia's story helped break down barriers with children who had been reluctant to open up about their own experiences. Child advocacy organizations saw a 400% increase in volunteer applications in the weeks following the broadcast. The episode was shown at social work conferences, used in training programs for foster parents, and became required viewing for many adoption agencies. But perhaps the most profound change was in the people who were there that day. Steve Harvey has said in interviews that Sofia's episode changed him fundamentally as a host and as a person. "That little girl reminded me why I do what I do," he said during a 2023 interview. "It's not about being funny or entertaining. It's not about the ratings or the money. It's about creating moments where people can be their best selves, where truth can be spoken, where love can happen." Steve began incorporating messages about foster care and adoption into his other shows. He started a mentorship program connecting successful adults with children in foster care. Every year on the anniversary of Sofia's episode, he dedicates his show to highlighting families who have chosen to adopt older children or children with special needs. Denzel Washington, too, was transformed by the experience. He redirected a significant portion of his foundation's resources toward foster care and adoption programs. But more than that, he began speaking openly about the experience in interviews, crediting Sofia with teaching him something about courage that all his years of acting couldn't. "I've played heroes, warriors, leaders," Denzel said in a speech at a children's advocacy gala 6 months after the episode aired. But I learned what real courage looks like from an 8-year-old girl who stood on a stage and asked to be loved forever. That's the kind of strength that changes the world. The Denzel Washington Family Center, which opened 2 years later in Los Angeles, serves as a resource hub for foster families and children in care. Sofia's portrait hangs in the main lobby, along with the words she spoke that day. "I just want someone to choose me and mean it forever."
Sofia,
now officially Sofia Martinez, thrived in ways that surprised even her new parents. Her grades improved dramatically once she felt secure in her placement. She joined the school choir, made friends easily, and began talking about wanting to become a social worker when she grew up. She wanted to help other kids find their forever families. The trauma of her early years didn't disappear overnight, but with therapy, love, and stability, Sofia learned to trust that good things could last. The night terrors gradually faded. She learned to unpack her belongings when she moved to her new bedroom, to put photos on the walls, to believe that this room, this family, this love was permanent. Elena and Roberto Martinez adopted Sofia officially on her 9th birthday, exactly 1 year after the Family Feud episode aired. The ceremony was attended by 2 special guests, Steve Harvey and Denzel Washington, both of whom had stayed in touch with the family throughout the year. Steve Harvey kept his promise about mentorship, calling Sofia every few months just to check in, to hear about school, to remind her that she was brave and special and loved. Denzel sent her books, first picture books, then chapter books, then novels as she grew older, each one inscribed with encouraging messages about the power of storytelling and the importance of speaking your truth. But it wasn't just the famous men who were changed by Sofia's courage. Dr. Jennifer Chen, the child psychologist who had been working with Sofia before the show, used the episode as a teaching tool with other children in her practice. Sofia's willingness to speak her deepest truth gave other children permission to voice their own fears and hopes. Marcus Williams, a 12-year-old boy who had watched the episode while living in his 6th foster home, asked his social worker the next day if he could meet with prospective families and tell them his truth the way Sofia had. His honesty about his fears of abandonment led to a connection with a family who understood his needs, and he was adopted 4 months later. The ripple effects continued for years. Teachers reported that children became more willing to talk about difficult home situations. Foster care agencies began incorporating Sofia's story into their training programs, showing prospective parents what it looked like when a child trusted them with their deepest fears. The suit jacket that Steve Harvey had originally worn that day was retired from his television wardrobe and donated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, where it's displayed as part of an exhibit on television moments that changed society. The placard next to it reads, "Sometimes the most important moments in television happen when the cameras capture something beyond entertainment, when they capture the human heart in its most vulnerable and powerful state." 5 years later, Sofia returned to the Family Feud studio as Steve's special guest for a follow-up episode. Now 13, poised and confident, she talked about her experience and thanked America for the love and support she'd received. But she also had a message for other children in foster care. "I want every kid watching this to know that you're worth choosing," she said, looking directly into the camera with the same intensity she'd had as an 8-year-old, but now backed by years of security and love. "You're worth fighting for. You're worth loving forever. And if nobody has told you that lately, I'm telling you now." The second episode became almost as popular as the first, but this time the focus was on Sofia's strength rather than her vulnerability. She had become living proof that love could heal, that families could be chosen as well as born, and that speaking your truth, no matter how scary, could change everything. Steve Harvey keeps a photo of that second taping on his desk. Sofia, now tall enough to reach the buzzer easily, laughing at one of his jokes while Denzel, who had returned as a guest, applauded in the background. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful stories don't end with a single moment of crisis, but with years of growth, healing, and love. And Sofia Martinez continues to carry the lesson she learned that day, that the most courageous thing you can do is speak your truth, even when your voice shakes, even when you're scared, even when you're standing on a stage that feels too big for your frame, because that's how love finds you. That's how families are born. And that's how one small voice can change the world.